My name is Harold. I'm 65 years old, and I'm sitting in my quiet living room tonight, staring at old photographs scattered across my coffee table. 20 years. That's how long it's been since my son Marcus spoke to me. 20 years of silence, 20 years of wondering if I made the right choice when I walked away from everything I loved. But 3 weeks ago, my phone rang, and the voice on the other end changed everything. It was Marcus, and he had an invitation that would force me to face the painful truth about family money and what really matters in this world. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button if you've ever felt like family only calls when they need something. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next will show you exactly how I handled the most manipulative Christmas invitation of my life. Looking back now, I can still remember the smell of sawdust and pipe glue that clung to my work clothes every evening when I came home to our little house in Milwaukee. Those were simpler times back in the 80s and 90s, when Marcus was just a boy with scraped knees and a gap-toothed grin. I worked as a plumber, then sometimes pulling 14-hour shifts, crawling through basements and fixing leaky pipes for folks who needed someone reliable. My hands were always rough, my back always ached, but seeing Marcus run toward me when I pulled into our driveway made every sore muscle worth it. I taught him how to fish at Lake Michigan on those rare Saturdays when I wasn't working emergency calls. We'd sit on the pier for hours, Marcus chattering about school, while I helped him cast his line. When he was 8, we spent an entire summer building a treehouse in the big oak behind our house. Nothing fancy, just some scrap lumber and a lot of love, but Marcus treated it like his personal castle. Those summer evenings we'd sit up there eating peanut butter sandwiches Evelyn packed for us, watching the sun set, while Marcus told me about his dreams of becoming a lawyer someday. Evelyn was different then, too. She'd bring us lemonade and laugh when Marcus got splinters calling us her two construction workers. She seemed proud of the life we were building, even if money was always tight. When Marcus made honor roll, she'd tape his report cards to the refrigerator and brag to the neighbors about her brilliant son. I thought we were happy. I thought we were a team. But something started shifting when Marcus entered high school. He began talking about college, about Harvard and Yale, about a world that seemed impossibly far from our little house with its creaky floors and second-hand furniture. Evelyn's eyes would light up during these conversations in a way they never did when I talked about my work. She started making comments about bettering ourselves and giving Marcus the opportunities he deserves. The first crack appeared during Marcus's junior year when he brought home college brochures. Evelyn spread them across our kitchen table like treasure maps pointing to ivy-covered buildings and talking about tuition costs that made my stomach drop. "Harold," she said, without looking at me, "we need to think about Marcus's future seriously. This could change everything for our family." I remember feeling something cold settle in my chest. The way she said "our family" made it sound like I wasn't really part of it, just an obstacle to overcome. But I pushed those feelings down and picked up extra shifts working weekends and holidays, determined to help pay for whatever dream school Marcus chose. When the acceptance letter from Harvard arrived, I was genuinely proud. My son, the first person in either of our families to go to college, was heading to the most prestigious university in the country. But instead of celebrating together, I felt Evelyn and Marcus pulling away from me like they were already embarrassed by the man who still had grease under his fingernails and drove a 10-year-old pickup truck. The distance grew wider each semester Marcus was away at school. During his freshman year, our phone calls became shorter and more formal. He'd tell me about his classes and professors, but there was something different in his voice, like he was talking to a friendly acquaintance rather than his father. When he came home for Thanksgiving, I noticed he'd started correcting my grammar and making subtle faces when I told stories about work. Evelyn was changing too. She'd always been ambitious, but now she seemed almost ashamed of our modest life. She started talking about networking and social connections, dropping hints about how important it was for Marcus to make the right friends. One evening, while Marcus was back at school for his sophomore year, she turned to me during dinner and said, "Harold, maybe you should think about going back to school yourself. Get some kind of business degree. Marcus needs to see that his father has ambition." I tried to explain that I liked my work, that there was dignity in fixing things and helping people, but she just shook her head. "That's exactly the problem, Harold. You're too comfortable being ordinary." The breaking point came during Marcus's winter break in 2003, right after Christmas. He'd been home for a week, and I'd barely had a real conversation with him. Every time I tried to ask about his life, his friends, his plans, he'd give me these polite, distant answers like I was interviewing him for a newspaper article. Finally, on New Year's Eve, I suggested we drive down to the lake like we used to, maybe talk about things. That's when it all exploded. Marcus looked at me with something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Embarrassment mixed with frustration. "Dad," he said, "I can't keep pretending everything's fine. My friends at Harvard, their fathers are doctors, lawyers, business owners. They ask what you do, and I have to tell them you're a plumber. Do you know how that feels?" Evelyn was standing in the kitchen doorway, and instead of defending me or telling Marcus he was being cruel, she nodded. "Your father needs to understand Marcus. We've all grown, but he's stayed exactly the same. It's holding our whole family back." I stood there in our living room, surrounded by the furniture I'd bought with my own sweat, looking at Christmas presents I'd worked overtime to afford, and realized I'd become a stranger in my own home. My son was ashamed of me, and my wife agreed with him. The man who'd sacrificed everything to give them opportunities was now the biggest obstacle to their happiness. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. I wrote Marcus a letter explaining that I loved him too much to hold him back, that maybe he'd be better off without a father who embarrassed him. I left it on his bed, packed a single suitcase, and drove away from the only life I'd ever known. I told myself it was temporary, that once Marcus graduated and started his own life, maybe we could find our way back to each other. I never imagined it would be 20 years before I heard his voice again. Chicago became my refuge and my prison. I found a small studio apartment in a neighborhood where nobody knew my name or my story, and I threw myself into work with a desperate intensity. I picked up jobs with 3 different plumbing companies, working every hour I could find, sending money to an account I'd set up for Marcus's education, even though Evelyn never acknowledged receiving it. The silence from Milwaukee was deafening. Every year on Marcus's birthday, January 15th, I'd write him a letter. Nothing dramatic or guilt-inducing, just updates about my life and questions about his. I'd mail them to the house, then later to his college address, then eventually to the law firm where I'd heard he was working. 20 years of letters and not a single response. The holidays were the worst. Every Christmas I'd call the house, hoping maybe the spirit of the season would soften hearts. Evelyn would answer, her voice turning icy the moment she recognized mine. "Harold," she'd say, "Marcus doesn't want to talk to you. Please stop calling." Then the dial tone, leaving me alone with my regret and a TV dinner that tasted like cardboard. I tried reaching out through extended family, old friends, anyone who might still have contact with Marcus. My brother Mike would shake his head sadly and tell me that Evelyn had poisoned everyone against me, spreading stories about how I'd abandoned my family during Marcus's crucial college years. The truth became irrelevant. All that mattered was the narrative she'd crafted about the deadbeat dad who couldn't handle his son's success. In 2007, I heard through Mike that Marcus had graduated from Harvard Law and landed a job at a prestigious firm in Milwaukee. Part of me wanted to show up at his office to congratulate him face to face, but I knew it would only make things worse. Instead, I sent a card to his workplace with a simple message, "Proud of you, love Dad." It came back marked, "Return to sender." 3 years later, Mike mentioned that Marcus had gotten married to a woman named Sarah, a doctor he'd met through mutual friends. I spent that whole day imagining the wedding I'd never see, wondering if Marcus had walked himself down the aisle, or if Evelyn had found some substitute father figure. The thought of some other man giving away my son made me physically sick. The grandchildren came next. Sophie in 2011, Daniel in 2013. I learned their names through social media profiles that Marcus had forgotten to make private. I'd spend hours staring at photos of these two beautiful kids who shared my blood but would never know my name. Sophie had Marcus's dark hair, but my mother's eyes. Daniel looked exactly like Marcus had at that age, all knees and elbows and mischievous grins. I started a savings account for each of them, depositing money every month for college funds they'd never know existed. It was foolish maybe, but it made me feel connected to them somehow. I imagined teaching Daniel how to throw a baseball, reading bedtime stories to Sophie, being the grandfather I'd never get the chance to become. By 2015, I'd given up any hope of reconciliation. Marcus was 32, successful, married with children. He'd built a complete life without me in it, and I had to accept that maybe that was for the best. I focused on my work, helped train younger plumbers, and tried to find meaning in fixing other people's broken pipes, since I couldn't fix my own broken family. Little did I know that in 5 years, everything would change in ways I never could have imagined. Retirement had never been in my vocabulary. At 63, I was still climbing under houses and wrestling with stubborn fixtures, figuring I'd work until my body gave out completely. But when COVID-19 hit in March 2020 and the whole world shut down, the plumbing company I'd worked for longest told all us older guys to stay home for safety. Suddenly, I had more time on my hands than I'd known what to do with in decades. My little rental house in Chicago had a detached garage that I'd been using for storage, filled with tools and spare parts I'd accumulated over the years. With nowhere else to go and nothing but time, I started tinkering. I'd always been frustrated by how inefficient most home water filtration systems were. Expensive to install, expensive to maintain, and half the time they didn't even work properly. So I began designing something better. It started as a hobby, just a way to keep my hands busy while the world fell apart around us. Using PVC pipes, some industrial filters I'd salvaged from jobs over the years, and a lot of trial and error, I built a compact filtration system that could purify even the nastiest water. I tested it with samples from Lake Michigan, from old buildings with corroded pipes, even from puddles after rainstorms. The results were consistently clean, pure water at a fraction of the cost of existing systems. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was having problems with rusty water from her old building's pipes, so I installed my prototype system in her basement. Within a week, she was bragging to everyone in the building about her crystal-clear water. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, and before I knew it, I had a waiting list of people wanting their own Herald systems. That's when Kevin Martinez knocked on my door. He was a 28-year-old environmental engineer who'd heard about my filtration setup through a friend of a friend. Kevin had been working for a corporate consulting firm, but the pandemic had him reevaluating everything about his career. When he saw what I'd built in my garage with basic materials and pure intuition, his eyes lit up like I was showing him the Holy Grail. "Mr. Wallace," he said, examining every joint and connection. "Do you realize what you've created here? This is more efficient than systems that cost 10 times as much. We could revolutionize home water treatment." I laughed and told him I was just an old plumber killing time, but Kevin wouldn't let it go. He came back the next day with research about water contamination rates, market analyses, and a business plan that made my head spin. He wanted to partner with me to turn my garage hobby into a real company. The next 18 months were a whirlwind I never saw coming. We formed Clean Flow Solutions, LLC, with Kevin handling the business side while I perfected the manufacturing process. We started in my garage building units one at a time, but demand exploded faster than we could keep up. The timing was perfect. People were more health conscious than ever. Water infrastructure was failing in cities across the country, and consumers wanted affordable solutions they could trust. By late 2021, we'd moved into a proper facility and hired 12 employees. By mid-2022, we were shipping units nationwide and fielding calls from international distributors. The company that started with spare parts and determination was generating 7 figures in annual revenue, and my share was making me wealthy beyond anything I'd ever imagined. The strangest part was the media attention. Local news picked up the story first. From plumber to entrepreneur, Chicago man's garage invention becomes million-dollar business. Then, national outlets started calling, wanting to interview the everyman inventor who disrupted an entire industry. I found myself on morning talk shows, speaking at small business conferences, and gracing the cover of trade magazines I'd never heard of. But success couldn't fill the hole in my heart where my family used to be. I bought a modest house in a better neighborhood, set up college funds for Sophie and Daniel with even more money, and donated generously to causes I believed in. Yet every night I'd sit in my comfortable new living room and wonder if Marcus had seen any of the articles about Clean Flow Solutions, if he knew his old man had amounted to something after all. I still didn't dare reach out directly, terrified of another rejection that might break me completely this time. December 15th, 2023. I remember the date exactly because I'd been dreading another lonely Christmas, my 21st, since leaving Milwaukee. I was in my home office reviewing quarterly reports Kevin had sent over when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, so I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer on the 4th ring. Hello? Silence for a moment, then a voice that made my heart stop. Dad, this is Marcus. I couldn't speak. After 2 decades of imagining this moment, dreaming about what I'd say if my son ever called, my mind went completely blank. The voice was deeper than I remembered, more mature, but unmistakably his. I saw you on the news. He continued, his tone carefully neutral. The business you built. It's impressive. Marcus, I managed to say. I can't believe it's really you. Yeah, well, I figured it was time we talked. It's been a long time. The conversation that followed was stilted, awkward, like 2 strangers making small talk. He asked about the business, about Chicago, about my health. I asked about his law practice, about Sarah and the kids, careful not to reveal how much I already knew from my years of distant observation. Neither of us mentioned the fight, the letters, the 20 years of silence stretching between us like a canyon. Then he surprised me. Actually, Dad, I was calling because Sarah and I were talking, and we thought maybe you'd like to come for Christmas dinner this year. The kids are old enough now to meet their grandfather, and it seems like the right time. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. You want me to come to Christmas? If you'd like to. We usually do dinner at 2 o'clock. Nothing fancy, just family. Family. The word hit me like a physical blow. After all these years, Marcus was including me in family again. But something in his voice nagged at me, something too controlled, too careful. This wasn't the emotional reunion I'd fantasized about. This was Marcus, the lawyer, Marcus, the negotiator, extending what felt more like a business invitation than a son reaching out to his father. I'd love to come, I said anyway, because what else could I say? Can I bring anything? But just yourself, Dad. We'll handle everything else. After he hung up, I sat in my office for an hour replaying every word of the conversation. The timing felt too convenient, too coincidental. Marcus had ignored my existence for 20 years, through college graduations and weddings and the birth of his children. But within months of my story hitting national news, within weeks of Forbes magazine calling me one of the most innovative small business owners in America, suddenly he wanted to reconnect, but doubt warred with desperate hope in my chest. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe the media coverage had simply reminded him that his father was still alive, still trying to make something of himself. Maybe Sarah had convinced him that the kids deserved to know their grandfather. Maybe 20 years was long enough for anyone to hold a grudge, even one as deep as ours. I spent the next week shopping for Christmas presents, something I hadn't done for family in decades. For Sophie, I bought a collection of science books and a chemistry set, hoping she might have inherited some of my curiosity about how things work. For Daniel, I chose a model airplane kit and some tools, thinking maybe he'd enjoy building something with his hands. For Marcus and Sarah, I picked out thoughtful but neutral gifts: a nice bottle of wine, a coffee table book about Wisconsin history. The night before Christmas, I barely slept. I kept imagining walking into Marcus's house, meeting my grandchildren for the first time, maybe even having a real conversation with my son about everything we'd lost and everything we might still salvage. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something more complicated than a simple family reunion, something that might break my heart all over again. Marcus lived in Brookfield now, in one of those sprawling suburban developments where every house looked like it belonged in a magazine. His place was a colonial with perfectly manicured landscaping and a 3-car garage, the kind of home that screamed success and stability. I sat in my rental car for 5 minutes before walking to the door, trying to calm my nerves and prepare for whatever waited inside. Sarah answered when I knocked, and I was struck by how much she looked like the photos I'd seen online. Tall, elegant, with the kind of understated confidence that comes from years of medical training. "Harold," she said with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for coming. Please come in." The house was beautiful in that sterile showroom way that made me afraid to touch anything. Everything was beige and cream and perfectly coordinated with family photos, arranged artfully on surfaces that gleamed like they'd been polished that morning. I could hear children's voices from somewhere deeper in the house, but they quieted when Sarah called out, "Kids, your grandfather is here." Marcus appeared from what looked like a home office, wearing khakis and a sweater that probably cost more than I used to make in a week. He looked successful, well-fed, comfortable, everything I'd hoped he'd become, and everything that reminded me how far apart our worlds had grown. "Dad," he said, shaking my hand like I was a client. "Good to see you." Sophie and Daniel emerged from the living room, hanging back shyly behind their parents. Sophie was 12 now, all legs and braces and cautious intelligence. Daniel was 10, with Marcus's serious eyes and a Spider-Man t-shirt that made me smile despite my nervousness. They looked at me with polite curiosity, the way kids examine any adult their parents have told them to be nice to. "Sophie, Daniel, this is your grandfather," Sarah said in the tone she probably used with patience. "Why don't you say hello?" They mumbled greetings and accepted the presents I offered, but there was no warmth, no connection. I was just another adult in their lives, someone they'd been told was important, but who felt like a stranger. Which I realized with a pang was exactly what I was. Dinner was an exercise in careful conversation and long silences. The dining room table was set with china that looked like it had never been used, and the food was restaurant quality, but somehow lacking the warmth of a real family meal. Marcus and Sarah asked polite questions about my business, about Chicago, about my retirement plans, but they didn't ask about my health, my happiness, my loneliness, or any of the things family members typically want to know about someone they love. Instead, the conversation kept circling back to clean flow solutions. How many employees did we have now? What were our expansion plans? Had I considered franchising the concept? Was I looking at going public? It felt less like a family reunion and more like a business dinner, where everyone was being extremely polite while sizing up potential opportunities. The kids were quiet throughout the meal, occasionally glancing at me with mild interest, but mostly focused on their phones or whispering to each other. I tried asking them about school, about their hobbies, about their friends, but their answers were brief and polite. They didn't know me, had no reason to care about me, and were probably counting the minutes until they could escape back to their rooms. After we finished eating, Sarah efficiently cleared the table while Marcus suggested we move to the living room to talk. The kids disappeared immediately, and I found myself sitting on an expensive sofa across from my son, searching for something real to say after 20 years of silence. That's when Marcus's mask finally started to slip. "Dad," he began, leaning forward with his hands clasped, "I want to be honest with you about something. The law firm is going through some challenges right now. The legal market has changed a lot in the past few years, and we're looking at some significant expansion opportunities that require substantial capital investment." My heart sank as I realized where this was heading, but I stayed quiet, letting him continue. "Sarah and I have been talking, and we think there might be some ways we could work together, pooling our resources for mutual benefit. Your business acumen is clearly exceptional, and there are some opportunities in the legal field that might interest an entrepreneur like yourself." I listened to Marcus's pitch with growing sadness and a strange sense of clarity. He had charts, prepared printed materials about his firm's strategic positioning and market opportunities. Sarah joined us with coffee and her own presentation about diversification strategies that would benefit the whole family. They talked about real estate investments, education funds for the children, and something they called multi-generational wealth building. What they didn't talk about was love. They didn't ask about the 20 years I'd spent wondering if they were happy, healthy, safe. They didn't mention the letters I'd sent, or the birthdays I'd missed, or the grandchildren I'd never met. They certainly didn't apologize for cutting me out of their lives, or acknowledge the pain they'd caused by treating me like I was dead. Instead, they treated me exactly like what I'd apparently become to them: a potential investor, a business opportunity, a solution to their financial problems wrapped up in the convenient package of family obligation. Marcus spoke about leveraging synergies and maximizing returns, while Sarah nodded approvingly and calculated figures on her phone. "Of course," Marcus said, as his presentation wound down, "we understand this is a big decision, and we wouldn't want you to feel pressured. But we're family, Dad, and family takes care of each other. This could be the start of something really positive for all of us." I sat there for a long moment, processing what had just happened. My son, the boy I'd taught to fish and helped build a treehouse, had just delivered a business proposal that would make a used car salesman blush. After 20 years of silence, he'd invited me to Christmas dinner, not because he missed me or wanted to reconcile, but because he needed money, and I was suddenly rich enough to provide it. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. For decades, they'd treated me like an embarrassment because I was just a working-class plumber. Now they wanted to welcome me back into the family precisely because I'd transcended those humble origins and become successful by their definition. I was still the same person, with the same values, the same heart, the same love for my family. But now I had money so suddenly I was acceptable again. "This is a lot to think about," I said finally. "Can I have some time to consider everything you've shared?" Marcus brightened immediately. "Of course, Dad. Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere. And this is the kind of decision that shouldn't be rushed. Sarah smiled warmly for the first time all evening. We're just so glad you're back in our lives, Harold. It feels like the family is complete again. I managed to smile back, but inside I was dying. The family had never been incomplete from their perspective. They'd deliberately excluded me and built their lives around my absence. I was only welcome now because I'd become useful, because I represented opportunity rather than embarrassment. As I prepared to leave, Sophie and Daniel dutifully hugged me goodbye, coached by their parents, to show affection for the grandfather they'd just met and would probably forget about if this arrangement didn't work out. Marcus walked me to my car, his demeanor more relaxed than it had been all day. "Thanks for coming, Dad," he said. "I know this is all a little awkward after so much time, but I think we can build something really good here. For everyone." Driving back to my hotel, I felt emptier than I had in years. The reunion I'd dreamed about for 2 decades had finally happened, and it was worse than I'd ever imagined. My son didn't miss me, love me, or want me in his life. He wanted my bank account, my business connections, my newly acquired status as a successful entrepreneur. I wasn't his father. I was his potential benefactor, and everything about the evening had been designed to soften me up for the ask. But as the initial hurt began to fade, something else took its place. Not anger exactly, but a cold determination to teach my family a lesson about the difference between love and opportunity, between genuine relationship and calculated manipulation. They wanted to play games with my emotions and my money. Fine. But they were about to learn that the old plumber they'd once been ashamed of had learned a few things about strategy during his years in business. I didn't call Marcus right away. Instead, I spent a week back in Chicago thinking through everything that had happened and what I wanted to do about it. The hurt was real. Discovering that my son's reconciliation was purely transactional felt like losing him all over again. But underneath the pain was something sharper, a resolve that had been building for 20 years. I wasn't angry in the explosive, destructive way I might have been at 45. At 65, I'd learned that the most effective responses are often the most measured ones. Marcus and Sarah had shown me exactly who they were and what they valued. Now I was going to show them the same courtesy. The first step was to let them think they were winning. When Marcus called 3 days after Christmas, his voice was eager and warm, in a way it had never been during our reunion. "Dad, I hope you had a good trip back to Chicago. Sarah and I have been talking, and we're really excited about the possibilities we discussed. Have you had a chance to think about the partnership opportunities?" "I have," I said carefully. "It's a big decision, and I want to make sure I handle it properly. There are some financial arrangements I need to put in place, some consultations with my accountant and lawyer. These things take time when you're dealing with the amounts we discussed." Of course. We completely understand. Take all the time you need. We just want you to know that we're here to support you through the process in any way we can." Over the next 3 months, I let Marcus and Sarah court me. They called regularly to check in, invited me to visit again, sent photos of the kids, and generally behaved like the loving family I'd always hoped they could be. The difference was that now I knew it was all performance, every smile calculated, and every gesture designed to keep me invested in their vision of our partnership. Marcus started calling me every Sunday, conversations that felt like gentle sales pitches wrapped in family news. He'd tell me about Daniel's Little League games and Sophie's science fair project, then smoothly transition into updates about real estate opportunities or mentions of other families who'd successfully leveraged their resources for everyone's benefit. Sarah would get on the phone to share medical conference gossip and ask about my health, then casually bring up vacation properties or private school options that might be worth considering for the grandchildren's future. They invited me to visit for Easter, and this time the kids seemed slightly more comfortable around me. Sophie showed me a science project she'd been working on, and Daniel asked if I wanted to throw a football in the backyard. For brief moments, I caught glimpses of what being a real grandfather might feel like, which made the underlying deception even more painful. But I played my part perfectly. I praised Marcus's business acumen, complimented Sarah on her financial planning skills, and let them believe I was gradually warming to their vision of family investment strategies. I asked thoughtful questions about their proposals, requested additional information about market opportunities, and generally behaved like a wealthy businessman who needed to be convinced but was moving steadily in their direction. The breakthrough came in April when Marcus called with barely contained excitement. "Dad, I think I found the perfect opportunity for us to start working together. There's a building downtown that would be ideal for expanding my firm, but the owner is only giving us a 30-day window to make a decision. If we could move quickly on this, it would be a great first step in our partnership." "How much are we talking about?" I asked. "2.4 million, but the potential return is incredible. And having you as a partner would open doors for the firm that I could never access on my own. This could be the beginning of something really significant for our family." I told him I'd need a week to arrange financing, which sent him over the moon with gratitude and excitement. But instead of calling my bank, I called my lawyer and had him prepare some paperwork of my own. Then I invited Marcus, Sarah, and the kids to join me for dinner at the most expensive restaurant in Milwaukee, telling them I had important news about our family's future. They arrived dressed like they were attending a board meeting. The kids scrubbed and polite, Marcus and Sarah practically glowing with anticipation. I'd reserved a private dining room, and as we settled in with menus that probably cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month, I could feel their excitement building. "I want to thank all of you," I began, "for welcoming me back into your lives after so many years. These past few months have shown me what family really means, and I've learned things about myself and about all of you that have changed my perspective completely." Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances, Sarah reaching over to squeeze Marcus's hand under the table. The kids were unusually attentive, probably sensing that something important was about to happen. "I've made my decision about the investments we've discussed," I continued, "and I want to share it with everyone here because it affects our whole family." The room was completely silent, everyone leaning forward slightly, waiting for me to announce how I was going to distribute my wealth among them. Even Sophie and Daniel seemed to understand that their lives were about to change in some significant way. "I'm going to use every penny of my money to start a foundation," I said calmly. "The Harold Wallace Family Foundation will provide support for single fathers, children of divorce, and families dealing with abandonment issues. I've already spoken with my lawyers, and the paperwork should be finalized within 30 days. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a kind of panic as he realized what I was actually saying. "Dad," he said carefully, "I think maybe there's been some misunderstanding. What about the building I mentioned? What about the partnership opportunities we've been discussing? There's no misunderstanding, son. I understand perfectly. You invited me back into your lives because you thought I could solve your financial problems. You spent months pretending to care about me because you wanted access to my bank account. Well, congratulations. You've taught me exactly what I needed to know about the difference between love and manipulation." Sarah's composure cracked first. "Harold, you're being unreasonable. We're family. Family helps each other. You can't just throw away money on strangers when your own son needs help." "Family helps each other," I repeated. "You're absolutely right, Sarah. So where was my family when I was working 3 jobs to pay for Marcus's college? Where was my family when I spent 20 years writing letters that were never answered, making phone calls that were never returned, sending Christmas cards that came back marked "Return to Sender"? Marcus tried a different approach. Dad, I know we made mistakes. I know we hurt you. But can't we move past that? Can't we build something positive together? I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the boy I'd taught to fish, or the young man I'd been so proud of, but a middle-aged stranger who viewed me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. Marcus, do you remember the tree house we built when you were 8? He looked confused by the change in subject. Yeah, I remember. Do you remember what you told me while we were sitting up there eating peanut butter sandwiches? Dad, I don't see what this has to do with anything. You told me that when you grew up you wanted to be just like me. You said I was the best dad in the world because I could fix anything, and I always kept my promises. Do you remember that? His face flushed, and he couldn't meet my eyes. I kept that promise, son. I worked myself half to death to give you opportunities I never had. When you told me I was embarrassing you, when your mother said I was holding the family back, I removed myself from your lives because I thought that's what you needed. I spent 20 years hoping you'd realize that love isn't about money or status or social connections. I hoped you'd figure out that a father who sacrifices everything for his child's future might be worth having a relationship with, regardless of his bank balance. The kids were staring at their plates, clearly uncomfortable with the adult conversation happening around them. I felt sorry for them. They were innocent victims of their parents' greed and my disappointment. But you never learned that lesson, I continued. Instead, you learned the opposite. You learned that people only matter if they can benefit you, that relationships are transactions, that love is conditional on usefulness. So I'm going to teach you a different lesson. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder of documents. This foundation isn't just about helping other families, though that's important work that needs doing. It's about showing you what unconditional love actually looks like. I'm giving away my money not to spite you, but because I love you too much to enable the people you've become. Marcus was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. Dad, please. Think about what you're doing. Think about Sophie and Daniel's future. Think about the legacy you could leave for your family. I am thinking about their future, Marcus. I'm thinking about what kind of adults they'll become if they grow up believing that grandparents exist to fund their lifestyles and solve their parents' problems. I'm thinking about the legacy I want to leave. Not a pile of money that disappears in a generation, but an example of what it means to have principles and stick to them. I stood up, leaving the documents on the table. The foundation will be operational within a month. You're welcome to apply for assistance if you ever find yourselves genuinely in need, but you'll have to compete with every other family that asks for help. Your applications will be judged on merit, not genetics. Sarah's face was white with shock and fury. You're punishing children for their parents' mistakes. That's not love. That's cruelty. No, Sarah. Cruelty is what you and Marcus did to me for 20 years. Cruelty is using children as emotional leverage to extract money from their grandfather. What I'm doing is refusing to participate in that system anymore. I walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. Sophie, Daniel, if you ever want to have a real relationship with your grandfather, one that isn't about money or what I can give you, you know where to find me. But it will have to be your choice, not something your parents orchestrate because they want something from me. As I left the restaurant, I heard Marcus calling my name, his voice desperate and angry. But I didn't turn around. I'd said everything that needed saying, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt completely free. The months that followed were the most peaceful I'd experienced in decades. Setting up the Harold Wallace Family Foundation gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since my early days building clean flow solutions. Working with social workers, family therapists, and community organizations to identify families who truly needed help reminded me why I'd always loved fixing things. There's something deeply satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again. The foundation's first year was remarkable. We helped 43 single fathers navigate custody battles and career transitions. We provided emergency housing assistance for 37 families dealing with abandonment situations. We funded counseling services for over 200 children whose lives had been disrupted by family dysfunction. Every success story felt like a small victory against the pain and selfishness I'd encountered in my own family. Marcus called several times during those first few months, his tone varying between pleading and accusatory. Sometimes he tried to appeal to my emotions, talking about family legacy and the importance of blood relationships. Other times he attempted to negotiate, suggesting compromises where I could pursue my charitable interests while still taking care of family responsibilities. I listened politely, but never wavered. "Son," I told him during one particularly intense conversation, "you had 43 years to build a relationship with me based on love and respect. You chose to build one based on shame and financial opportunity instead. I'm too old to pretend that foundation can be changed now." Sarah tried a different approach, sending me photos of the kids and updates about their activities, clearly hoping to trigger grandfather instincts that would overcome my resolve. Sophie made honor roll. Daniel scored his first goal in soccer. They were growing up, developing personalities and interests and dreams, and I was missing all of it, just like I'd missed Marcus's childhood milestones. But I'd learned the difference between missing my grandchildren and being manipulated by them. Sarah's updates always came with subtle reminders about private school tuition, summer camp fees, and college preparation expenses. The message was clear: if I wanted to be part of these children's lives, I needed to pay for the privilege. The most difficult moment came 8 months after the restaurant confrontation, when Sophie called me directly. She was 13 by then, old enough to understand that family relationships were more complicated than she'd realized. "Grandpa Harold," she said, her voice tentative and young. "I was wondering if maybe you'd like to come to my science fair next week. I'm doing a project about water purification, and Mom said you know a lot about that." My heart nearly broke listening to her innocent request. Here was exactly what I'd been hoping for. A grandchild reaching out to me directly, wanting a relationship based on shared interests rather than financial transactions. But I also knew this call hadn't happened in a vacuum. "That sounds like a wonderful project, Sophie," I said gently. "Tell me about what you've learned so far." We talked for 20 minutes about filtration methods and water contamination, and she was bright and curious in ways that reminded me powerfully of Marcus at that age. But when the conversation began winding down, she hesitated and then said, "Grandpa, Mom, and Dad have been really stressed lately about money stuff. I don't really understand it, but I know they're worried. Maybe you could help them somehow." And there it was. Even this sweet, innocent conversation with my granddaughter had been orchestrated as another attempt to access my wallet. Sophie genuinely wanted to talk to me about science, but she'd also been coached to make that final appeal. The manipulation was so seamless, so practiced, that I wondered how many other conversations in my family had been similarly scripted. "Sophie," I said carefully, "I want you to know that I love you and Daniel very much, even though we don't see each other often. But the problems between your parents and me are adult problems that aren't your responsibility to fix. You don't need to worry about money or try to help with grown-up issues. Your only job is to be a kid and do well in school and pursue the things that interest you. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet house and cried for the first time since leaving Milwaukee 20 years earlier. Not for the money I'd given away or the relationships I'd lost, but for the innocence that had been stolen from a 13-year-old girl who'd been turned into an unwitting accomplice in her parents' schemes. But even that painful conversation confirmed that I'd made the right choice. The foundation was breaking cycles of dysfunction and teaching families healthier ways to relate to each other. I was funding family counseling programs that helped parents understand the difference between providing for children and manipulating them. I was supporting legal aid services that protected vulnerable family members from financial exploitation. Most importantly, I was living according to principles that had taken me 65 years to fully understand. Love isn't something you can buy or sell. Respect isn't something you can inherit or demand. Family relationships that depend on financial transactions aren't really family relationships at all. They're business arrangements disguised as emotional connections. As I write this story now, 2 years after that Christmas dinner that changed everything, I can honestly say I'm happier than I've been since Marcus was a little boy. The foundation keeps me busy and gives my life meaning. I've made genuine friendships with people who care about the work we're doing rather than what I can do for them. I sleep well at night knowing that my money is helping families heal rather than enabling dysfunction. Do I miss my son and grandchildren every single day? Do I wish things could have been different? Of course I do. But I've learned that you can't save people from themselves, and you can't buy love from people who view you as a commodity rather than a human being. Sometimes I imagine a different ending to this story, one where Marcus calls to apologize sincerely, where we rebuild our relationship on honest foundations, where I get to be the grandfather I always wanted to be. But I'm not holding my breath for that call, and I'm not structuring my life around that hope. Instead, I'm focused on the families. I can actually help the children who benefit from programs that teach healthy relationship skills, the single parents who get support without strings attached. Those relationships are built on mutual respect and genuine care rather than financial manipulation, and they've shown me what family connections can look like when they're based on love instead of opportunity. The greatest gift I can give my son and grandchildren isn't my money. It's the example of a man who finally learned to value himself enough to refuse being treated like an ATM with legs. Maybe someday they'll understand that lesson. Maybe they'll even thank me for it. But if they don't, that's their choice to make, and I'm finally at peace with whatever they decide. True wealth isn't in your bank account. It's in the love and respect you earn through your actions. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is letting them face the consequences of their choices. And sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is refuse to enable his child's worst impulses, even when it means walking away from everything he once hoped to have. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this situation. Have you ever had family members who only showed interest when they needed something from you? How did you handle relationships that felt more like transactions than genuine connections? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your stories might help other people who are dealing with similar family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships and the complicated choices we all have to make. And please share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the difference between love and manipulation. Because sometimes we all need reminders about what healthy relationships actually look like. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you think about the relationships in your own life. Remember that you deserve to be valued for who you are, not what you can provide, and never let anyone convince you otherwise. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.